wondering if there really is a difference between the cheap and the very expensive watercolour paint? Is student grade paint good enough? And is there perhaps an affordable set of watercolour paint that could get you started with joyful watercolour without breaking the bank? I was lucky enough to get to test out this set of 36 tubes of professional watercolour paint, which is very well priced. Would you like to see? This rather pretty box has got such a wide selection of colour that I have been so excited to get open and have a bit of a play with. But I've been a bit nervous about it because they're so inexpensive that I really didn't want to get my hopes up. Now, despite the price, the Meiliang watercolour set is not intended purely for children. It is priced in a student level range, but it's reported to be of very high quality. And spoiler alert, I'm happy to say that so far the Meiliang watercolour set has been an absolute delight to paint with. I'm used to my set of professional grade watercolour paints that I've filled up from big name brands over many years. I've got a mix of Schmincke, Daniel Smith and Holbein paints. I tend to call them my grown-up watercolours, and I use them for most of my paintings. So I've been really excited to see how they compare to this set of Paul Rubens Meiliang watercolour tubes. Now, I usually buy 15mm tubes, which is the slightly bigger size of my professional paints, and those range in price from around 11 to 21 US dollars. The 5mm tube versions would be between $8 and $14. If you're wondering why these tubes of individual watercolors are at different prices, it's because of the different pigments that are required to make different colors. Artist quality paints are typically available in individual colors which are arranged in series. Series 1 colors tend to have cheaper pigments, and Series 5 colors would tend to have the more expensive pigments. But more expensive pigments are not necessarily better. They're just more costly to acquire. But that's why you might see this broad range of prices. The Meiliang paints come in a set, so you're not buying the individual tubes. So really, for the purposes of arguments, let's just assume they were all Series 1 paints for the purposes of our maths to do this comparison. So if I was to choose 36 of the 5mm tubes, because the Meiliang size is a small size, from somewhere like Daniel Smith, Schmincke or Holbein, and they all happen to be Series 1, I'd be looking at about $288 US. That's $36 times 8. But the Meiliang set of 36 has a list price of $36 US at the time of writing this, but they're often on special. So that makes the Meiliang set at least 8 times cheaper. Now, if you're starting out, it's unlikely that you're going to buy 36 tubes in one go. So you might not be needing to shell out $288 to get started, but you might look for a set of, say, 6 of the 5mm tubes. I found a Schmincke set for $48 at the time of writing this. So you would still be spending more for 6 Schmincke tubes than you would for all 36 of the Meiliang tubes. Now, of course, you can easily paint with only 6 colours, but let's be honest. You'd really quite like a veritable rainbow of 6 times as many colours to play with, wouldn't you? And you'd save yourself $18, which you could spend on brushes or chocolates, because painters need to snack. Once you painted for a while, you know what colours you like, and you could then go and look for those colours in the artist quality or professional brands if you feel the need, or just splash out on a speciality colour or two that has a special property to add to your palette. Now let's see the colours in the Meiliang set of 36 tubes. I'm really not one for much patient swatching. I know lots of people love this, but I don't. However, I did it for this set because I really wanted to see what all those colours are like. Now, I think the best way to test paints is to get on and make a painting rather than filling in little boxes on a swatch card. But I also prefer to stick to a limited colour range in a single painting. A limited palette is always going to produce a more harmonious, unified painting. But that would mean quite a lot of paintings before I got to use all these colours. So I got to swatching. You're welcome. I tested a dab of the paint almost neat out of the tube with little or no water. Then next to that, I added another dab of the colour and then softened it out with clean water to see how much whoosh, yes, very technical, how much whoosh the colour had and how the pigments interact with the water. This is where the magic of watercolour comes from, the way the pigments behave in the water. I also tested a strong colour mix and a more dilute version over a black stripe to see how transparent they are. Now, watercolour should be transparent, in my opinion. That's another part of their joy. If you like opaque paint, then gouache is probably the medium for you rather than watercolour. When I'm buying individual colours of watercolour, I do my best to choose only the transparent ones because that's my preference. Most of these colours in the Meiliang set are transparent from what I can see. You can't see them over the black strip in most cases. I was delighted to find that they're tremendously similar versions of many of my favourite vibrant colours. You can see my comparison here. Do you think you'd be able to tell which brand I was using in a finished painting? I also used the Meiliang set and painted a loose rosebush painting. The colours are delightful. They are intense and vibrant. Now, if you're thinking that you prefer muted colours, don't forget that it's easy to desaturate a vibrant colour by adding a drop of its complementary colour. The complementary colour is the one that sits directly opposite on the colour wheel. I have another video where I talked a little bit more about that, and I will pop the link to it below and maybe up in the cards. So it's far better to start off with vibrant paints, in my opinion. But of course, I do adore juicy colour. But then you have the option. If you only have muted colours, you're stuck with them, as you cannot make a vibrant colour out of a desaturated one. It only works the other way around. So what about the question of whether expensive watercolour paint is worth it? Well, this is a very personal question, I think. I'm going to circle back to this point in a minute, but I think we all have to figure out what supports and motivates us. If you know you feel more empowered by equipping yourself with the best artist quality brands you can buy, then do that. If you know you feel liberated by having approachable suppliers that do not cost an arm and a leg, then choose those. All it comes down to is which ones are going to make you more likely to actually do some painting. Here are some of the key points as I see it. Meiliang set offers a wide colour range, 36 colours already chosen for you for a low price. The artist quality brands have more colours in the whole range, e.g. 238 plus colours from Daniel Smith. But how many of those do you really need? And it can make choosing an individual colour a bit overwhelming. Now, cost is a no-brainer. The Meiliang set is at least 8 times cheaper any way you look at it. The Meiliang set is a collection of clean, vibrant colours. If you're looking for special properties like granulation, iridescence, or staining colour, you will need to look elsewhere. More information about the properties of each particular colour is easily available for the professional artist quality brands. They all have colour charts that spell out things like transparency, granulation, staining, and light fastness for each colour. Meiliang paints have less information, but it is printed on the label of each of the very tiny tubes. Even with my glasses on, I did find this a bit of a challenge, just saying. I couldn't find such an equivalent colour chart detailing the watercolour paint properties for Meiliang, but I did notice that some of these properties are marked on the individual tube. Transparency and weathering resistance, which I'm assuming to be light fastness, but I could be wrong. However, you do need a magnifying glass to read them on these tiny 5mm tubes. When I got out my magnifier app on my phone, I saw that the individual pigments are also listed. This is rather reassuring. There are websites that will tell you all sorts of information about those individual pigments, so you can research the light fastness for yourself if you're that way inclined. Personally, I'm really not too bothered either way. I paint because it's fun. It's relaxing and satisfying. I don't really care how my painting turns out. I do care about how delicious the colours are while I'm painting and how easy they are to use. If you're painting for sale or commission or something like that, then I think you need to pay a bit more attention to how fugitive, non-light fast, the colours are. But if you paint for the joy of it or to digitize the paintings, then I don't think it matters. Let's talk about the advantages of watercolour tubes over watercolour pans. This is one of the things I'm rather enjoying, and that's using paint fresh from the tube. It's been my habit to paint from a pan. You spritz the pan back to life with a bit of water and you're good to go. And I've chosen this approach many years ago because I can't abide waste. Having tubes gives you the option of working this way or using the paint fresh from the tube. Of course, you can get a palette box and squeeze out the tubes into the palette wells and let them dry. But working with fresh paint is lovely. You squeeze out little blobs or lines of the colours you think you'll need onto your palette just before you start painting, and off you go. I think it can be a little easier, well actually it's a lot easier, to get your consistency right if you start with fresh paint as opposed to dry pans. And this is actually the key to water. Controlling the ratio of pigment to water is very, very important. But I've opted to use dry pans many years ago because I found that I inevitably miscalculated the amount of paint I needed and which colours. Now, you could say that watercolour is never wasted because dry paint can always be reconstituted with water, so you can come back and use your leftover paint tomorrow. But in reality, who knows if you're going to need that particular colour tomorrow or the next day? And can you tell which colour it is when it's dried on the palette? The dry versions can look very different from the dilute ones. So how big of a palette are you going to end up needing? And it's always going to be a big mess. So these are all the reasons why I've opted to stick to my palette of dry pans. But if your whole tube of Meiliang paint costs less than $1, it's very much easier to let go of the little dab of unused paint and clean your palette at the end of every session. Which brings me to one of the core painting questions I believe we all need to answer. Are your watercolour paints too good or not good enough? There's no right or wrong answer here, only a matter of personal preference. Some of us will feel that we can only do our best and most serious work with the highest grade of expensive professional supplies. Some of us feel entirely the opposite way. Outrageously expensive art supplies can heap a burden of expectations on your painting efforts and bring out your most perfectionistic tendencies while you try to do those professional paints justice. If not, you're just wasting them, right? Actually, I don't think you're wasting them, even if your painting doesn't turn out well. But so many of us do, in fact, feel that way. I'm always seeking the supplies that are good enough to be a joy to use, but not so good that they're intimidating. In short, the ones that are just right. The best supplies are the ones that you're going to be able to use to paint with joyful abandon. So in sum, my advice is, painter, know thyself. And if you decide that you want inexpensive paint that performs to a very high standard, this Meiliang set might just be the one for you. And don't forget, if you're wanting to learn a little bit more about watercolour supplies, I've got a whole class about exactly that. It's completely free, and you can sign up from the links that you'll find somewhere around this video.
Now that we've considered our options for paints, you might have questions about brushes. Luckily, I've got just the video for you, and you can watch that one next. I'll pop the links up on the screen. We'll talk about which brush to choose for a particular painting, and of course the most important part, the watercolour brushstrokes for beginners to help you get the most out of whichever brush you choose. Happy painting!